Welcome, friends. Today we are reading Chapter 8 of Rolling Thunder, but before we begin, I thought we would take some time to go over that this is all a very true story. Doug Boyd, he led quite an incredible life, and I would encourage you all to go further research him. He did spend some time with Rolling Thunder, and these are his true accounts. Chapter 8 The Ruby Valley Expedition. We left the Palisade campsite in the early morning for the long ride south to Ruby Valley. I rode in Alice's red Ford and Rolling Thunder drove. The red 1965 Valiant known as the committee car and a green Citroen belonging to another committee member followed. Including the committee people, Rolling Thunder, Alice, Anne and Richard, and myself, there were 15 of us in 3 cars. For some of the others, this was not their first trip to Ruby Valley. Anne and Richard and a few committee members had visited this reservation last summer and had met Frank Tomoke, chief of the Western Shoshone. After a while, we started and we parked at the side of the road and looked over the hill below where the trees had been cleared by the Bureau of Land Management. The chaining had been done long before, and even the dead trees were gone. It was impossible to imagine how the area had looked in its original state. Rolling Thunder thought it would be more impressive to see some of the areas that had been claimed recently. There were several areas around the route to Ruby Valley, but without Oscar Johnny, it would be very difficult to find them. Oscar Johnny had sent word that he had to remain in Elko on urgent business, so we had left without him. Rolling Thunder decided we would drive straight to Ruby Valley and back. It would be late by the time we returned to camp. As usual, Rolling Thunder drove fast. He was in good humor and laughed easily. We had to stop at every fork and intersection to wait for the others. The roads were so winding that the 2 cars behind us could not see. We approached a curve at the top of a hill. He alerted us. "Now watch for this deer when we get around this curve. It's a baby fawn, still got its spots." As we climbed the hill, he continued, "Lots of beautiful deer up in here. White hunters come up here, right on the reservation sometimes. Greedy, inconsiderate, destructive. Headhunters is what they are. Trophy hunters after a prize, and they don't care what they kill. Sometimes they leave the carcass along the path as they go up, or sometimes we find the bodies in the dump. That's not the native way, I can tell you that. We take what we need and no more, and nothing is wasted. And it's done in the proper way and with respect. When I hunt, I take 1 deer and no more, and that one is chosen beforehand. I never go running around searching and chasing after a deer. I'll go right to him. Like I'll walk over some hill, and he'll be standing there waiting for me, because that's been arranged that way, and he knows it, and I know it." Suddenly he pointed, "Look, see, there he is." I missed it. I was apparently the only one who failed to see the spotted fawn lying in the bushes near the road. It stood as we went by, according to the others, but it did not run. I had looked too far down the road. I decided that if such a thing should happen again, I would be not so eager. It did happen again, many times. During the following months, it wasn't uncommon to hear Rolling Thunder say, "A lot of coyotes getting up together here. We hear them tonight," or, "There's a bird sitting in the road right around this bend. I forget what you call him in English. I call him." Shortly after we saw the deer, it began to rain. It rained all the way to Ruby Valley. The light rain was accompanied by dramatic claps of thunder that seemed to roll along after the cars. We were on dirt roads made slippery by the rain, and the driving became difficult. Rolling Thunder obviously enjoyed the rain. It was hot, dry season in these parts, and this was unexpected relief. "Listen to the rolling thunder," he said. "The thunder is really rolling in the sky." Either the rain stopped by the time we got to Ruby Valley, or there had been no rain there. It was hot and dry. As we drove through the reservation, Rolling Thunder stopped several times, got out of the car, and walked along to some of the small, simple houses of his Shoshone friends. At one place, he stood and talked for several minutes, but at others, no one came to the door. "They all work at the ranches around here," he explained. "I guess this ain't the time for meeting people around here." They all seemed to be out in the fields taking in the hay. Later, we turned onto a road that went up to the foothills. When we came to the end, we got to stretch our legs. This was a clear and quiet place. If the hills hadn't been there, you could have been able to see forever. It was 1 o'clock and everyone was hungry. We took out the bags of food we had prepared: carrots, celery, sandwiches, boiled eggs, and potatoes. Rolling Thunder walked down a wide path and disappeared in the distance. We ate lunch strolling around the cars and lounging in the hot sun. I began to get a feeling of the vastness of the Shoshone territory, the discontinuity of the reservations, and the isolation of the people. From our campsite in the Palisades is about 50 miles to the Lee Reservation, and 90 miles south to the Ruby Valley, home of the traditional chief. The Duck Rally Reservation is over 100 miles north of Carlin and extends into Idaho. There are a few small towns or villages that are mostly native, but they are controlled communities where the lives and the land of the people are manipulated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Traditional native families are scattered all over the immense territory. Most of them are isolated with little means of ordinary communication. "I've been talking to a couple friends down there," Rolling Thunder said as he walked down up the path. "Now I thought you might all like to talk to them for a few minutes. They're traditional people, and they don't speak English too well, but you'll be able to communicate with them. I guess you know you'll have to leave your cameras behind this time." 2 old men were sitting on a bench in front of an old wooden shack that I supposed to be their home. Their faces were dark and leathery, deeply lined. They kept their eyes toward the ground most of the time, but when they looked up, their eyes were sharp and piercing. They sat very quietly. It was an awkward meeting. There seemed to be little to say and no way to say it. This was not true, I knew, but it seemed so at the time. One of these men was the younger brother of Frank Temoke, hereditary chief of the Western Shoshone. The other, older man, carried on what little conversation there was. The visit was brief. We tried to talk about the pinyon trees and the hunters, but the only response we got was a few nods and near smiles. We shook hands and left. "I guess that was all we could expect at this time," Rolling Thunder said as we walked back towards the cars. "Remember, most reservation natives have never met a white man with a good heart and good intentions. But I didn't just bring you here to meet these people. I brought you here so they could meet you. Well, it's only a beginning." Near the old Indian's cabin was a cleared area. We were told this was used for traditional festivals and important gatherings. At one edge of the clearing, we saw the cabin of Sub-Chief Oscar Johnny. Looking out in this great circle over trees and gullies towards the distant hills, I stretched my mind to take in the many memories of this land. It wasn't hard. I had heard from Rolling Thunder the legend of Ruby Valley, the story of the signing of the treaty with the blood of an Indian. I recall that legend now. Our treaty, which outlines the lands which comprise the Western Shoshone Indian Nation, was made in Ruby Valley, Nevada in 1863. Our treaty was signed by our principal chiefs and headsmen and ratified by the Congress of the United States. Our treaty was paid for in blood. At that time, the white people were weak and few in number, and it was the white man and his government who came to us asking for a peace treaty. The white people were at war among themselves, and this war was called the Civil War, and President Lincoln of the United States wanted to get gold from California in order to finance the war. The white man's government did not have enough soldiers to guard all of the stagecoaches that carried the gold across what is now Nevada. It was their desire to have a treaty of peace with the people through whose lands that the stagecoaches had to travel. We were those people, the Western Shoshone, and the land was ours. So the white people and the representatives of the United States government put out the word that they were anxious to meet with the chiefs and their people of the Western Shoshone Nation for the purpose of the signing of such treaty. A date was set, and the word was passed by runners, and on horseback there would be a feast, and that all the Indians were to come. It was to be a great feast, with plenty to eat. And then the peace treaty would be signed by both parties, and there would be no more fighting. The Indians were to come unarmed because they would not need their guns. So, at the appointed time, the Western Shoshone and their chiefs all gathered at the designated place in Ruby Valley, and they came unarmed. The soldiers also came with the government representatives, but the soldiers had rifles, which they stacked in bunches. When the Indians had all gathered, the soldiers grabbed their rifles and killed an Indian whom they previously captured and brought with them. They said that the Indian was accused of robbing a stagecoach and that he would be an example to all Indians who might be thinking of obstructing the white man's passage through Indian lands. They cut up the Indian and put him in a huge black iron pot, and they cooked him. And the soldiers aimed their rifles at the heads of the people and forced the people to eat some of this man that they had killed. Men, women, and children were all forced to eat some of this human flesh, while the soldiers held their guns on the people. It was after this terrible thing which the white man did to our people that the Treaty of 1863 was signed. Our treaty has been paid for in blood. We will hold to our treaty and our lands, and one day the white man will have to live by the treaty and pay his debts, because this is the law of balance. 100 years later, in October 1968, Rolling Thunder and a band of Shoshone, led by Frank Temoke, put on war paint to confront some of the white men who were hunting and drinking on Indian land in Ruby Valley. The white men were taken by surprise, and the Shoshone warriors ran them off the reservation. The hunters never returned. I thought of the many years of Shoshone struggle with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, and the ranchers who were taking over their land. I thought of the signing of the treaty, and of the time before the white man first appeared. The hundreds of years of festivals and ceremonies. Since the coming of the white man, the harmony between the people and the land had been disturbed, and things have never been the same for the Shoshone. On our return home, we made a side trip to Ellie to eliminate the risk of running out of gas on the lonely reservation roads. We had supper in a restaurant in Ellie, and it was well after dark when we started home. Rolling Thunder led the way up the mountain and back towards the pass. We could not see the cars behind us. Often I looked out the back window, but there's never even a headlight or beam in the darkness. Rolling Thunder knew they were following. "They're coming along," he said every few minutes. Then, when we nearly reached the top of the hill, he swung off onto the shoulder, making room to turn around. "I feel like they've just stopped." I wonder how he knew. We went back down the road a few miles and came upon our two commanding cars. The committee car was raised on a bumperjack, and the green Citroen was parked behind close. As we approached the other cars, Rolling Thunder shouted, "Look out!" Everyone standing around the car leaped back, and the car rolled forward, off the jack. It felt as though he had made an instant prediction. The tire was changed, and we continued the trip uneventfully. That brief incident now seemed like a fleeting dream. I believe that none of us had been watching consciously. None of us had thought about what Rolling Thunder was doing. But when we were on our way again, I thought about those minutes, like an instant replay, and then it struck me what had happened. We had stood around, half-conscious in the night, hesitating to get too close to the car that had just fallen. In what seemed like an impossibly short time, Rolling Thunder had taken out the spare, gotten the car back into the air, loosened the lug bolts, removed the tire, laid the trunk, and put on the other tire, lowered the car, and put away the tools. Rolling Thunder had done this all while everyone watched but failed to notice. I wondered as we were riding along again whether the others were aware of what I now realized. From the time we had started out for Ruby Valley, the whole day had unfolded as if it was under the management of Rolling Thunder. Now I began to wonder whether even our being here, Alice because she had told it was meant to be, and Richard because of a sudden change of plans, my own coming from Council Grove and all the others of their varieties and reasons, was really due to some management of events. What Rolling Thunder had done seemed to acknowledge that. It seemed like he had done and made a gesture of responsibility. He had brought us together, picked a campsite, taken note of, and provided our supplies. After the long talks, the exhibitions he planned, arranged, and guided, even the changing of a tire had been surrendered to his hands. And that is the end of Chapter 8. Niawa.